The USSR rejected annexing Mongolia for, among other reasons, not having been a part of the Russian Empire. Yet it annexed Tannu Tuva despite it having not been a part of the Russian Empire either. So why did the USSR annex Tannu Tuva? Firstly, I just lied. Pretty evil of me, I know. It was a part of Tsarist Russia, pretty late though. In 1911 there was a revolution in China and Tuva was a part of China. Well, Russia took the chance and encouraged Tuvan separatism. In 1914, before World War I, it was made a protectorate. You have to know Russian colonists have been settling Tuva since the 19th century, roughly since 1838. In fact, Kyzyl, the capital of Tuva since it was made a Russian protectorate in 1914 until this day, was founded by Russian settlers. After 1881, Russians were allowed to settle permanently in Tuva or back then known as Uriankai, but only 200 settlers at one place. Tuva was partially even treated like a part of Russia since then, despite formerly being a part of China, albeit a very autonomous part of China. Note that this history of Russian settlement and first annexation will be an important justification for the Soviets later. In the 20s, after Tuvan independence, the Soviets tried to suppress Pan-Mongolism and in 1929 created an alphabet for the Tuvan language. They also introduced new words into the Tuvan language. When a coup d'état was done by the Soviets in 1929 to install a more pro-Soviet and less pan-Mongol government. After this coup, the Russian settlers were also given full citizenship. Before, they were just treated as privileged foreigners. These measures, of course, weren't just accepted by all Tuvans. There were rival writing classes that opposed the Russian-imposed state alphabet as it was called. Many opponents were Buddhist conservatives. Tuvans also were suspicious of foreigners, including the Chinese and also Russians. There was also a small uprising by Tuvanian cattle breeders in 1930 for different reasons. So these things enabled an annexation. A big Russian minority which was 1/6 of the Tuvan population and more Soviet influence than before. But why was Tuva annexed and how was it justified? Like Mongolia did over the course of its communist history, Tannu Tuva's Central Committee of the Tuvanian Revolutionary People's Party asked for Tannu Tuva's admission into the USSR. To be precise, in 1944. 2 months later, the Presidium of the Supreme Soviet of the USSR generously granted the request. So why did the USSR annex Tannu Tuva? One reason stated in the Peoples of the Soviet Far East by Walter Kolarz was that Tuva had a lot of cattle and high-quality horses. Personally, I would disagree with that because the Tuvan economy already was integrated into the Soviet economy. But there was another economic reason. Resources. Oops, don't mind my pronunciation. Not resources, resources. Natural resources. To be precise, metals including gold, minerals and perhaps most importantly during the start of the nuclear arms race, uranium. But there's more, even if that probably was the main motivation. Tuva is a good national fortress to guard the Kuznetsk Basin, a part of the USSR rich in coal and to this day one of the biggest mining areas in all of Russia. Then the fourth reason. I might have talked about Pan-Mongolism, but Tuvans aren't actually Mongol. They are Turkic and speak a Turkic language. They do enjoy a deep cultural connection with Mongolia though. But you know who else was Turkic? A bunch of peoples in the Soviet Union. So another motivation was to unite the Turkic Tuvans with the Turkic cousins, especially the Oirats, some of which even refer to themselves as Tuvans. This could have potentially made them want to join up with Tuva, though uniting them under the Soviet banner seemed like a good idea. Tuva also was more viable than Mongolia because annexing Mongolia would have been a too big provocation towards China. So what changed for Tuva after the annexation? Firstly, the Tuvan People's Revolutionary Party transformed into a provincial organization of the Soviet Communist Party. Secondly, Tuva lost its special criminal code, constitution and stuff like that. Before the annexation, the Tuvan People's Revolutionary Party was mostly comprised of Tuvans. Afterwards, there were a lot of Russians and Ukrainians in the key positions, with figurehead roles being for Tuvans. Tuva also wasn't its own Soviet republic, but an autonomous oblast under the Russian Soviet Federative Socialist Republic. Though it did later change from an autonomous oblast into an autonomous Soviet Socialist Republic under the Russian SFSR in 1961. Additionally, the Soviet ruble replaced the aksha. But unlike in other parts of the USSR, Tuvans still make up over 80% of the population to this day. So lastly, how did the USSR justify its annexation of Tannu Tuva? Remember the settlers? The Soviet thesis wasn't that it was economics that made Russians settle in Tuva, but that the Tuvan people themselves linked their fate to the fate of the Russian people. They also said the progressive Tuvans always relied on Russia in the struggle for a better future. Also, the fact that Tuva was a part of the Russian Empire, even if only briefly, was another justification. Unlike Mongolia, which wasn't a part of the Russian Empire, not formally, even if closely linked. Then you could use Turkic unity as a justification, but I don't really know how much that holds up internationally, and frankly people didn't really care a lot for Tuva in the midst of World War II. So, in summary, why did the USSR annex Tannu Tuva? Because unlike Mongolia, it was a part of the Russian Empire, was a strategic asset, and small enough to not ruin relations with China.